The gunshot that shattered the winter silence was the only reason Amelia Zimmerman stumbled backward through the creek's frozen edge, her boot catching on submerged rocks as icy water swallowed her whole. One moment she had been running from the bandits who had ambushed the stagecoach, and the next, the freezing current of Smoky Hill Creek dragged her under, her heavy winter coat becoming a death trap as it soaked through. Her lungs screamed for air as she fought against the weight pulling her down, the shock of the cold water paralyzing her limbs. The world above the surface seemed impossibly far away, the pale January sky of 1878 flickering like a dying candle through the rippling water. Vincent Xavier had been tracking the bandits for 3 days, his breath forming white clouds in the bitter Kansas air as he pushed his horse hard through the winter landscape. He was a hired gun, though he preferred to think of himself as someone who helped folks when the law could not reach far enough. At 26, he had seen more than his share of violence and cruelty, but something about this particular gang had gotten under his skin. They had been terrorizing travelers between Hays City and the smaller settlements for months, and Vincent had taken it upon himself to put an end to their reign of terror. When he heard the gunshot echo across the frozen plains, followed by the unmistakable sound of someone crashing through ice, Vincent did not hesitate. He spurred his horse toward the creek, his eyes scanning the scene. 3 bandits were riding away fast, apparently satisfied with whatever they had done. But there, in the middle of the creek, he saw the dark shape of someone beneath the surface, arms flailing weakly. Vincent threw himself from his horse before the animal had even fully stopped. The cold hit him like a physical blow as he plunged into the creek, the water so frigid it felt like 1,000 knives stabbing into his skin. He could barely see through the murky water, but he reached out blindly until his fingers closed around fabric. With every ounce of strength he possessed, he hauled the person toward him and kicked hard for the surface. They broke through together, both gasping for air. Vincent heard the person he had saved taking great, heaving breaths, choking on creek water. He wrapped one arm around the figure and pulled them toward the bank, his muscles screaming in protest as he fought against the current and the weight of their waterlogged clothes. His boots finally found purchase on the rocky bottom, and he dragged them both onto the frozen ground, collapsing beside the person he had pulled from the water. It was a woman, he realized, as she coughed and sputtered beside him. Her dark hair was plastered to her face, and her lips were already turning blue from the cold. They were both shaking violently, and Vincent knew they had minutes, not hours, before hypothermia set in. He forced himself to his feet, every movement feeling like he was moving through molasses. "Can you stand?" he asked through chattering teeth. She looked up at him with wide, terrified brown eyes and nodded, though when she tried to rise, her legs gave out beneath her. Vincent caught her before she fell and half-carried, half-dragged her to where his horse waited, stamping nervously at the smell of the creek water and the blood he could now see staining her sleeve. "Were you shot?" he demanded. "Grazed," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "They robbed the stage, killed the driver. I ran." Vincent swore under his breath. He stripped off his heavy coat, which was soaked through, and pulled a thick blanket from his saddlebag. He wrapped it around the woman's shoulders and then grabbed another for himself. They needed fire, and they needed it now. But the bandits were still out there, and they might come back to make sure there were no witnesses. "There's an old line shack about a mile west," Vincent said, making a quick decision. "Can you ride?" She nodded again, though he could see she was fading fast. He lifted her onto his horse and climbed up behind her, wrapping his arms around her to keep her steady and to share what little warmth they both had left. The horse seemed to understand the urgency, and moved quickly across the frozen ground toward the shelter Vincent remembered from his previous trips through this territory. The line shack was little more than 4 walls and a roof, but it had a small stove and some wood stacked beside it. Vincent kicked the door open and helped the woman inside, sitting her down on the single cot in the corner. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely strike a match, but eventually he got a fire going in the stove. The small space began to warm up almost immediately. "We need to get out of these wet clothes," Vincent said, trying to keep his voice steady and professional. "You will die if you stay in them." She nodded, her teeth chattering so hard she could not speak. Vincent turned his back to give her privacy and stripped off his own soaked clothing, wringing out what water he could before wrapping himself in a dry blanket he found in an old trunk. When he turned back around, the woman had managed to remove her coat and dress, though her fingers were too numb to undo all the buttons. She sat shivering in her undergarments, her skin pale as snow. Vincent helped her with the remaining buttons, keeping his eyes averted as much as possible, then wrapped her in every dry blanket and piece of fabric he could find. He added more wood to the stove and rubbed his hands together, trying to get feeling back into his fingers. They sat in silence for a long moment, the only sound the crackling of the fire and their ragged breathing. "Thank you," she finally said, her voice stronger now. "You saved my life." "Could not let you drown," Vincent replied, examining the wound on her arm now that they were safely inside. The bullet had indeed only grazed her, leaving a nasty furrow in her skin but nothing that would not heal. He cleaned it with water from his canteen and wrapped it with a strip of cloth torn from an old shirt he found in the trunk. "I am Amelia," she said. "Amelia Zimmerman. I was traveling to Hayes City to meet my cousin. She runs a boarding house there." "Vincent Xavier," he replied. "I have been tracking those bandits. I am sorry I did not get there sooner." Amelia looked at him properly for the first time, taking in his strong jaw, the scar that ran along his cheekbone, and the intensity in his gray eyes. He was handsome in a rough, weathered way, with dark hair that curled slightly when wet and broad shoulders that spoke of years of hard work. There was something about him that made her feel safe, despite the fact that they were strangers huddled together in a tiny shack in the middle of nowhere. "You jumped into a frozen creek to save me," she said softly. "That was either very brave or very foolish." "Maybe both," Vincent admitted, the ghost of a smile crossing his face. "But I have never been good at standing by when someone needs help." As the hours passed and they waited for their clothes to dry by the fire, they talked. Amelia told him about her life back in St. Louis, how her father had passed away 6 months earlier and left her with nothing but debts. Her cousin Martha had written to her, offering her a place to stay and work at the boarding house. It was a chance to start over, to build a new life away from the painful memories. Vincent told her about his own past, about growing up on a ranch in Texas, until his family was killed by raiders when he was 18. He had spent the last 8 years drifting, taking odd jobs, helping people when he could. He did not talk about the men he had killed or the darkness he sometimes felt creeping in at the edges of his mind. Instead, he told her about the beautiful places he had seen, the good people he had met, the reasons he kept going even when the world seemed determined to break him. There was something easy about talking to her, something that made Vincent want to open up in a way he rarely did. Maybe it was the intimacy of their situation, or maybe it was the way Amelia listened so intently, her brown eyes never leaving his face. Whatever it was, he found himself not wanting the conversation to end. When darkness fell, they shared the meager rations Vincent had in his saddlebag. Some dried beef, hardtack, and a small portion of coffee that he brewed over the stove. It was not much, but it was warm and it filled their empty stomachs. They agreed to take turns sleeping, with Vincent taking the first watch in case the bandits came back. Amelia protested that he should rest first after his ordeal in the creek, but Vincent insisted. He sat by the small window, his rifle across his knees, and watched the winter night settle over the Kansas plains. Behind him, he could hear Amelia's breathing gradually slow as she fell asleep. He found himself glancing back at her, at the way the firelight played across her face, and felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. He had been alone for so long. It had been easier that way, safer for everyone involved. People he cared about had a habit of dying, and Vincent had learned to keep his distance. But there was something about Amelia that made him want to throw caution to the wind, to take a chance on something that might actually matter. Vincent shook his head, trying to clear those thoughts. She was a woman who needed help, nothing more. Once they got to Hays City, she would start her new life and he would go back to drifting. That was the way it had to be. But when morning came and Amelia woke, stretching and smiling at him with genuine warmth, Vincent found himself hoping that maybe, just maybe, things could be different this time. Their clothes were dry enough to wear by dawn, though still stiff and uncomfortable. They dressed quickly, once again giving each other privacy, and prepared to continue the journey to Hays City. Vincent checked his horse, making sure the animal had weathered the night well, and helped Amelia mount up. The ride to Hays City took most of the day. The town was a bustling railroad hub, filled with cowboys, soldiers from nearby Fort Hays, and all manner of folks looking to make their fortune on the frontier. It was loud and chaotic and full of life, a stark contrast to the quiet isolation of the line shack. Vincent rode directly to Martha's boarding house, which was a sturdy two-story building on a relatively quiet street. A plump woman with graying hair came out to meet them, her face lighting up when she saw Amelia. "Good Lord, child, what happened to you?" Martha exclaimed, hurrying down the steps. "You were supposed to arrive yesterday." Amelia dismounted and fell into her cousin's embrace, suddenly overwhelmed by everything that had happened. Martha held her tight, shooting questioning looks at Vincent. "The stage was robbed," Vincent explained. "Miss Zimmerman here barely escaped with her life. I found her and brought her the rest of the way." Martha's expression shifted from concern to gratitude. "Then I owe you a debt, Mr. Xavier, Vincent Xavier," he said, tipping his hat. "No debt owed. I was just doing what anyone would do." "Nonsense," Martha said firmly. "You will stay for supper at the very least. I insist." Vincent hesitated. Every instinct told him to ride away now, to put distance between himself and the feelings that were starting to take root. But Amelia was looking at him with those warm brown eyes, and he found himself nodding. "I would be honored, madam." Martha bustled them both inside, immediately setting about getting Amelia into a hot bath and fresh clothes. Vincent waited in the parlor, feeling out of place among the lace curtains and delicate furniture. When Amelia finally emerged an hour later, her hair clean and pulled back in a simple bun, wearing a modest blue dress, Vincent forgot how to breathe for a moment. She was beautiful, even more so now that the fear and exhaustion had faded from her face. Supper was a hearty meal of roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread. Martha kept up a steady stream of conversation, asking Vincent about his work and his travels. He answered politely, but his attention kept drifting to Amelia, who sat across from him, occasionally catching his eye and blushing slightly. After the meal, Martha excused herself to tend to her other boarders, leaving Vincent and Amelia alone in the parlor. An awkward silence settled between them, neither quite sure what to say. "I suppose this is goodbye," Amelia finally said, her voice quiet. "I suppose so," Vincent replied, though the words felt wrong in his mouth. "I never properly thanked you," she continued, moving closer to him. "You risked your life for me, a complete stranger. That is not something I will ever forget." Vincent looked down at her, at the earnest expression on her face, and felt his resolve crumbling. "Amelia, The front door burst open and 3 rough-looking men stumbled inside. Vincent recognized them instantly as part of the gang he had been tracking. They must have followed them to town, waiting for the right moment to strike. "Well, well," the leader said, his hand resting on the gun at his hip. "If it is not the little lady who got away, and the fool who pulled her out of the creek. We saw you from across the street and thought we would come pay our respects." Vincent stepped in front of Amelia, his own hand moving to his weapon. "You boys should leave. Now." The bandit laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "We do not take orders from the likes of you, Cowboy. That woman is a witness to murder. Can't have her talking to the law." "The driver was an innocent man," Amelia said, her voice shaking but defiant. "You shot him in cold blood. And I will do the same to you if you do not shut your mouth," the bandit snarled. Everything happened at once. The bandit reached for his gun, but Vincent was faster. His revolver cleared the holster in a blur, and he fired once, hitting the man in the shoulder. The other 2 bandits scrambled for their weapons, but the sound of running boots echoed from outside. The sheriff and his deputies burst through the door, guns drawn. "Drop your weapons," the sheriff commanded. The bandits, seeing they were outnumbered, reluctantly complied. The sheriff's men dragged them out into the street, already shouting about getting them to the jail. The sheriff himself stayed behind, looking between Vincent and Amelia. "Someone want to tell me what this is all about?" he asked. Vincent and Amelia explained everything, from the stagecoach robbery to the chase that had led to Amelia nearly drowning. The sheriff listened carefully, making notes and nodding at the appropriate moments. "We have been after this gang for months," he said when they finished. "You 2 just gave us the break we needed. That woman's testimony will put them away for a long time, maybe even see them hang for the driver's murder." "I will testify," Amelia said firmly. "That man deserves justice." The sheriff tipped his hat to her. "You are a brave woman, miss. And you, Xavier, I have heard of you. You have done good work tracking down these types of men. If you are ever looking for steady employment, the county could use a man like you." Vincent considered the offer. He had never stayed in one place for long, always moving on before he could put down roots. But as he glanced at Amelia, he found himself wondering what it might be like to have a home, a purpose beyond just drifting from town to town. "I will think on it, Sheriff," he said finally. Over the next few weeks, as the trial approached, Vincent found reasons to stay in Hays City. He took odd jobs, helped the sheriff track down a few other outlaws, and spent every free moment he had at Martha's boarding house. He told himself he was just making sure Amelia was safe, that the bandits had no associates who might come after her. But deep down, he knew the truth. He was falling in love with her. Amelia had settled into her new life with remarkable ease. She helped Martha run the boarding house, cooking meals and cleaning rooms and making the guests feel welcome. She was good at it, Vincent noticed, with a natural warmth that made people comfortable. And every evening when the work was done, she would sit with him on the porch, and they would talk as the sun set over the plains. They talked about everything and nothing. About their hopes and dreams, their fears and regrets. Amelia confessed that she had been scared to come west, terrified of the unknown, but that now she could not imagine being anywhere else. Vincent told her about the loneliness that had dogged him for years, the feeling that he did not quite belong anywhere. "You belong here," Amelia said one evening, her hand reaching out to touch his. "With me. If you want to, that is." Vincent looked down at their joined hands, feeling the warmth of her touch seep into his skin. "I want to," he admitted, "but I am not sure I know how to stay. I have been running for so long, Amelia, I do not know if I can stop." "Then do not stop," she said simply. "Just run in place for a while, see what happens." He laughed at that, a genuine sound that surprised them both. "You make it sound so easy." "Maybe it is," she replied, moving closer to him. "Maybe we make things harder than they need to be." Vincent cupped her face in his hand, his thumb brushing across her cheek. "You are the bravest person I have ever met," he said softly. "You went through hell, and here you are, smiling and making jokes and telling me to stay." "I learned from the best," she whispered. "A certain cowboy who jumped into a frozen creek without a second thought." He kissed her then, a gentle, tentative kiss that quickly deepened as she responded. It felt like coming home after years of wandering, like finding something he had not even known he was searching for. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathless, and Vincent knew with absolute certainty that he was never leaving Hayes City again. The trial came and went. Amelia testified with quiet strength, never faltering even when the bandits glared at her from the defendant's table. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. The men were sentenced to hang for the murder of the stagecoach driver, and Amelia finally felt like she could breathe easy again. Vincent accepted the sheriff's offer of a deputy position, though he made it clear he would not be wearing a badge permanently. He would help when needed, but he also wanted time to build a life of his own. The sheriff agreed readily, glad to have Vincent's expertise available when trouble arose. In the spring of 1878, Vincent asked Amelia to marry him. They were sitting by Smoky Hill Creek, the same creek where he had pulled her from the water just a few months earlier. The ice had melted, and the water burbled cheerfully over the rocks, giving no sign of the terror it had once held. "I do not have much to offer you," Vincent said, holding her hand tightly. "Just myself and a promise that I will spend every day trying to make you happy. But if you will have me, Amelia, I would be honored to be your husband." Amelia's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married in June in the small church in Hayes City, with Martha crying happily in the front row and half the town in attendance. The sheriff served as Vincent's best man, and one of the other boarding house workers stood up with Amelia. It was a simple ceremony, but it was perfect, and when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Vincent felt like the luckiest man alive. They moved into a small house on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, but enough space for them to start their life together. Vincent continued his work with the sheriff, and Amelia still helped Martha at the boarding house a few days a week. They were building something real, something lasting, and it filled Vincent with a sense of purpose he had never felt before. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. Vincent struggled with nightmares sometimes, dark dreams of all the violence he had seen and caused. Amelia would hold him on those nights, whispering soft words until he calmed. And there were times when Amelia would wake up gasping, reliving the moment when the creek had tried to claim her life. Vincent would be there, reminding her that she was safe, that he would always keep her safe. But mostly, their days were filled with small joys. Morning coffee shared on the porch, evening spent reading by lamplight. Lazy Sunday afternoons when they would ride out to the creek and have a picnic, laughing as they remembered how they first met. They were building a life together, one ordinary moment at a time, and it was more than either of them had ever dared to hope for. In the winter of 1879, nearly 2 years after Vincent had pulled Amelia from the icy water, she told him she was pregnant. Vincent was terrified and thrilled in equal measure, hardly able to believe that he was going to be a father. He fussed over Amelia constantly, making her rest even when she felt perfectly fine, bringing her strange food combinations that she craved at odd hours. Martha thought it was hilarious, teasing Vincent mercilessly about how he had gone from a tough cowboy to a nervous mother hen. But Vincent did not care. Amelia and the baby were the most important things in his world, and he would do anything to keep them safe and healthy. Their son was born in early summer, a healthy baby boy with a strong set of lungs and his father's gray eyes. They named him Samuel, after Vincent's father, and from the moment Vincent held his son for the first time, he knew he had finally found what he had been searching for all those years. This was home. This was family. This was love. Amelia proved to be a natural mother, patient and gentle, but also firm when needed. Vincent was amazed by her strength, by the way she seemed to know exactly what Samuel needed even when the baby could not tell them himself. Together, they navigated the challenges of new parenthood, exhausted but happier than they had ever been. As Samuel grew, Vincent taught him about the land, about horses and cattle and the wide open sky. Amelia taught him to read and write, filling his head with stories and knowledge. They raised him to be kind but strong, to stand up for what was right even when it was hard. And Samuel thrived under their love and guidance, growing into a bright, curious child. In 1882, Amelia gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose. She had her mother's dark hair and warm smile, and she wrapped Vincent around her tiny finger from the moment she was born. Samuel was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to help take care of her, and Vincent and Amelia watched their little family grow with hearts full of gratitude. Vincent continued his work with the sheriff for a few more years, but as time passed, he found himself drawn more to the idea of ranching. He and Amelia saved their money carefully, and in 1884 they bought a small piece of land outside of Hays City. It was not much, just enough for a modest herd of cattle and some horses, but it was theirs. The work was hard, but Vincent thrived on it. There was something deeply satisfying about building something with his own hands, about providing for his family through honest labor. Amelia worked alongside him when she could, though with 2 young children, her hands were usually full at the house. But she never complained, never wished for an easier life. She had everything she needed right there on their little ranch. The years rolled by, marked by small triumphs and occasional setbacks. There were droughts that tested their resolve and hard winters that pushed them to their limits. But they weathered every storm together, their love growing deeper with each passing year. Vincent never stopped being amazed that he had found this life, that the scared, lonely drifter he had once been had transformed into a husband and father. Martha continued to be a fixture in their lives, doting on her great niece and nephew, and providing Amelia with advice and support. She lived to the ripe old age of 73, passing away peacefully in her sleep in 1890. Her death hit Amelia hard, but she took comfort in knowing that Martha had lived a full, happy life and had been surrounded by love until the very end. Samuel grew into a fine young man, strong and capable like his father, but with his mother's gentle heart. At 18, he began courting the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a sweet girl named Emily who fit into their family as if she had always been there. Rose, meanwhile, was showing signs of wanting to be a teacher, spending hours helping the younger children in town with their lessons. Vincent and Amelia watched their children grow with pride and a touch of melancholy. The years had passed so quickly, it seemed. One moment, they had been newlyweds learning to navigate life together, and the next, they were middle-aged parents watching their children prepare to start their own lives. but they still had each other. On quiet evenings, they would sit on the porch of their ranch house, holding hands and watching the sun set over the plains. Vincent would look at Amelia, her hair now touched with silver, and marvel at how beautiful she still was to him. And Amelia would look at Vincent, lines etched into his face from years of hard work and laughter, and thank God for the frozen creek that had brought them together. In the spring of 1895, Samuel married Emily in a ceremony that reminded Vincent and Amelia of their own wedding all those years ago. The young couple moved into a house on the neighboring ranch, close enough that they could still see each other regularly. Vincent taught Samuel everything he knew about ranching, preparing to eventually hand over the operation to his son. Rose, true to her aspirations, went to teachers' college in Topeka and returned to Hays City 2 years later as a certified teacher. She took a position at the local schoolhouse and threw herself into her work with passion and dedication. She was in no hurry to marry, she told her parents, though Vincent suspected it was more that she had not yet met someone who could match her fierce intelligence and independence. In 1899, Samuel and Emily welcomed their first child, making Vincent and Amelia grandparents for the first time. The baby girl, named Amelia after her grandmother, was the light of their lives. Vincent found himself thinking often about the journey that had brought him to this moment, holding his granddaughter and marveling at the family he had built. If someone had told him back in the winter of 1878 that jumping into a frozen creek would lead to all of this, he would not have believed them. But here he was, surrounded by love and laughter, his life full in ways he had never imagined possible. Amelia seemed to be thinking similar thoughts one evening as they sat together on the porch, watching Samuel and Emily playing with baby Amelia in the yard. "Do you ever think about that day?" she asked softly. "The day we met, all the time," Vincent admitted. "I think about how close I came to not being there, to missing that trail entirely, and I think about what my life would have been like if I had not found you." "Empty," Amelia said simply. "That is what mine would have been. I was so scared that day, Vincent. Not just of drowning, but of everything. Of starting over in a new place, of facing an unknown future. But then you pulled me out of that water, and suddenly I was not scared anymore. Or maybe I was still scared, but I knew I did not have to face it alone." Vincent pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "We have been through a lot together, have we not? The good and the bad, the easy and the hard, and I would not change a single moment of it." "Neither would I," Amelia agreed. "Well, maybe I would have preferred to meet you without almost dying first. But other than that, everything has been perfect." They laughed together, the sound carrying across the evening air. In the yard, Samuel looked up and smiled at his parents, so clearly still in love after more than 20 years of marriage. He hoped that he and Emily would have the same kind of lasting love, the same partnership that could weather any storm. As the new century dawned in 1900, the world was changing rapidly. Automobiles were becoming more common, though they were still rare enough to be a curiosity in a place like Hays City. There was talk of flying machines and other marvels of modern technology. But on the Xavier Ranch, life continued much as it always had, marked by the rhythms of the seasons and the simple pleasures of family and hard work. Vincent was 60 in 1914, his hair now completely gray and his body bearing the aches and pains of decades of physical labor. But he was still strong, still capable, and he still loved his life with a fierce intensity. Amelia was 56, her beauty undimmed in Vincent's eyes despite the years that had passed. They had been married for 36 years, and Vincent loved her more with each passing day. Samuel had taken over the bulk of the ranch work, allowing Vincent to slow down a bit. They now had 3 grandchildren, with Samuel and Emily's younger son and daughter joining baby Amelia. Rose had eventually married a local banker named Robert, and they had 2 children of their own. The Xavier family had grown beyond anything Vincent and Amelia had imagined in those early days. On a warm summer evening in 1918, as the world was recovering from the Great War that had touched even their remote corner of Kansas, Vincent and Amelia sat on their porch as they had done countless times before. They were watching their grandchildren play in the yard, the sound of their laughter filling the air. "We built something good here," Vincent said quietly. "Something that will last long after we are gone." "We did," Amelia agreed, leaning her head on his shoulder. "And it all started with you being brave enough or foolish enough to jump into that creek." "Best decision I ever made," Vincent said with a smile. "Second best," Amelia corrected. "The best decision you ever made was asking me to marry you." "You are right, as always," Vincent conceded. "Though both decisions are tied together, really. Could not have had one without the other." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The creek where they had met was just visible in the distance, its waters reflecting the dying light. It looked peaceful now, giving no hint of the drama that had unfolded there so many years ago. "You have any regrets?" Amelia asked suddenly. Vincent thought about it carefully before answering. "I regret the years I spent alone before I met you," he said finally. "I regret the pain I caused and the violence I participated in. But I do not regret anything that led me to that creek on that winter day, and I certainly do not regret anything that has happened since." "Good answer," Amelia said with a smile. "I regret losing my father before he could see the life I built here. I regret that he never got to meet you or know his grandchildren. But like you, I do not regret the path that brought me to Kansas, to Martha, to you." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, their family gathered around them. Samuel and Emily, Rose and Robert, and all 5 grandchildren came to sit on the porch, drawn by some unspoken understanding that this was a moment to be together. They talked and laughed, sharing stories and making plans, the love between them palpable. Vincent looked around at all the faces, at the family he and Amelia had created, and felt a profound sense of peace. He had spent so many years searching for something, for a place to belong, and he had found it in the most unexpected way. A frozen creek, a drowning woman, a split-second decision to jump. That was all it had taken to change the entire trajectory of his life. Later that night, as he and Amelia lay in bed, Vincent pulled her close and whispered, "I love you. I have loved you from the moment I pulled you out of that creek, and I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "I love you too," Amelia whispered back. "You gave me my life twice. Once when you saved me from the water, and once when you gave me a life worth living." They fell asleep in each other's arms, content and grateful for the years they had shared and the years still to come. Outside, the Kansas wind whispered across the plains, carrying with it the promise of tomorrow and all the tomorrows after that. Vincent Xavier passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1922 at the age of 68. He died in his own bed, in the house he had built with his own hands, surrounded by his family. Amelia held his hand until the very end, and when he took his last breath, she told him one more time that she loved him, that he had been the greatest blessing of her life. Amelia lived for another 5 years after Vincent's death. She remained active and engaged with her family, taking joy in her growing number of great-grandchildren. But everyone could see that a part of her had died with Vincent, that she was simply marking time until she could join him again. On a cold winter morning in January 1927, almost exactly 49 years after the day Vincent had pulled her from Smoky Hill Creek. Amelia passed away quietly in her sleep. She was 71 years old, and she died with a smile on her face, as if she could already see Vincent waiting for her on the other side. They were buried side by side in the Hayes City Cemetery, their headstones simple but bearing an inscription that told the story of their love. Together in life, together in death, forever in love. Their children and grandchildren mourned them deeply, but took comfort in knowing that Vincent and Amelia had lived full, happy lives and had loved each other until the very end. The ranch continued to operate under Samuel's guidance and eventually passed to his children, and then to his grandchildren. The Xavier name became synonymous with integrity and hard work in the Hayes City area, a legacy that Vincent and Amelia would have been proud of. And sometimes, on cold winter nights, when the wind howled across the Kansas plains and the creek ran swift and cold, locals would swear they could see two figures standing by the water's edge. A man and a woman, holding hands and gazing at each other with unmistakable love. They would watch for a moment, these ghostly figures, and then fade away into the darkness, leaving only the memory of a love story that had begun with a cowboy brave enough to jump into a frozen creek and a woman strong enough to build a life with him. The story of Vincent and Amelia Xavier became part of local legend, passed down through generations as an example of true love and the power of fate. Young couples would visit their graves, hoping that some of that enduring love would bless their own relationships. And every year on the anniversary of that fateful day in 1878, the Xavier family would gather at the creek, sharing the story with the youngest generation and making sure that the legacy of Vincent and Amelia lived on. It was a love story born from tragedy and terror, from a moment of desperate courage and the decision to open one's heart to possibility. It was a reminder that life can change in an instant, that a single act of bravery can lead to a lifetime of happiness. And it was proof that true love, once found, can endure anything and everything, lasting not just until death but beyond it, into eternity itself. The creek continued to flow through Hayes City, its waters sometimes calm and sometimes turbulent, but always moving forward, always changing, always full of life. And somewhere in its endless journey, it carried with it the echo of two hearts that had found each other against all odds and had held on tight, never letting go, no matter what challenges came their way. That was the legacy of Vincent Xavier and Amelia Zimmerman Xavier, a legacy of love that would never be forgotten.